Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the gray area. I'm Mark Gray. Somewhere between black and white, there is that shade of gray. But again, as the move from protesting went to demonstrating in the nation's capital, I think there are a couple of legitimate things that have happened from a public standpoint where they want to see change. Among them, there's the notion of defund the police, and others are looking for legitimate policy change as it relates to chokeholds and higher scrutiny of law enforcement. My next guest happens to be the Prince George's County, Maryland State's Attorney. She is Aisha Braveboy, and she's just completed her rookie season, if you will, of being the state's attorney. You have crossed it, so they say that the best thing about a rookie is that they become a sophomore, but you've seen a lot in your first year. How transformative has this been?
Well, I can say this. Someone like me, when I got elected on a reform platform, but I can tell you that other players in the system were not of that mindset. What I think the game changer that really has occurred right now is that there are more players in the criminal justice system that are opening their minds and also really focusing on some systemic policy changes in their agencies that they can employ to improve our system. So I'm encouraged. However, I'm cautiously encouraged because I actually want to see results. So I look forward to continuing to work to improve the system of justice in the county, and I'm hopeful that I'll have more collaboration on some of these reform efforts that we're trying to make.
It seems as though right now, the collaborative effort of people like yourself around the country, you seem to be motivated, not only what's going on in your neck of the woods, but seeing the commonality of what's gone wrong with the justice system. Are you sensing amongst your peers who hold similar job titles that this is a coming together moment, much like we've seen with the demonstrations amongst the people of color in the streets?
Yeah, I think what we know is that George Floyd could have happened in Prince George's County today. George Floyd could have happened in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Montgomery County, Anne Arundel, pick a county in Maryland. It could happen today. And I think that's what other state's attorneys, other police departments, other community groups and activists and church leaders, I think that is what everyone is saying, that George Floyd happened in Minnesota on that day, but it could happen in my community on any given day. So that is why it's really important for us to use this, not just the moment, but create a movement around this incident for better change.
And you know all too well, when we start talking about a rookie year, you had to deal with a similar circumstance here in Prince George's County, where a police officer, something happened in the car. When there was a suspect who was in custody. I'll leave it there for, objective purposes, but what kind of challenge does that present for you as a state's attorney?
You don't have to be objective because that officer was convicted and was sentenced and is currently serving out a prison term right now. So that officer used excessive force. It happened to be a white officer, and that white officer used excessive force against a Black man who was homeless, who at best had been would have been charged with a misdemeanor, and so the treatment that he received was completely uncalled for. And so we did prosecute that case, and we won a conviction. And then we also prosecuted a case involving a police officer who sexually assaulted another police officer, and we won a conviction in that case as well.
And that brings us to an interesting juxtaposition that you have to face oftentimes when you have to prosecute people who are supposedly bringing you evidence for cases that you are trying to prosecute. How difficult is the challenge to be in a position like yours to have to do something like that?
For me, it's not really that big of a challenge because I'm guided by the law and the facts. And, I apply the facts to the law and make a decision on charging and make decisions with respect to how we prosecute cases. And that is my job. And, look, I mean, would it be great if we always agreed? Yes, but that's unrealistic. And in the interest of justice and in the interest of representing my community, I just have to do what's right and let it stand at that.
When we start looking at uniform justice and law reform change, where does it start? Is it going to have to go through the Supreme Court, or do you think it has to go through constitutional amendments? Where do you think that the best strategy to affect change is?
Sure, I think we can do it starting at our local level and looking at what we fund and how we fund essential government services. In addition to that, the state provides us with an opportunity to make change in our criminal laws, to make our criminal justice system more fair and more reflective of the values of our communities. And so there are things like the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights that gives officers certain protections that no citizen or resident has, that prevents a certain level of transparency when incidents occur. And so I think that is an issue, and that's an area that the legislature can focus on really changing next year when they go back into session. But in addition to that, we need to dig a little bit deeper too. Part of the problem in our community is that people are burdened and saddled with convictions for the rest of their lives if they commit certain offenses, but they may have committed them 20, 30 years ago, but they still remain on their record because there is not a way to expunge those convictions. We need to not be afraid to expand expungement opportunities. That is a state legislative fix that can be made by our state legislators, and we need to hold them accountable for that.
How bad do you think the narratives, the perceptions that go with terms like thug, which is a pejorative for Black men, and protest versus demonstration when it comes to what in most cases, certainly around here, unbeknownst to what's going on Pennsylvania Avenue, were nonviolent, civil disobedient demonstrations. So how do you think certain words are affecting perception, certainly as it relates to Black men, in terms of how the perception affects the interaction between the two, and even so with Black women now too?
Sure. Well, let me just say, it's a protest. What we see, I don't care what they want to call it, it is a protest, and it should be a protest, because when someone is basically saying, I want to live, I want to be treated like a human being, and those who are sworn to uphold and enforce the law and protect and serve the community, who the community is actually paying their salaries for this protection and this service, are taking lives from individuals, that is a protest. I'm protesting to keep my life. And that is absolutely not a problem to say. I don't think demonstrations are nice, but they don't grab your attention. They don't mind when people demonstrate. They mind when they protest, because protest is a exercise of power. When you protest, you're exercising your power. And there is an inherent fear by many in the establishment of those who have been voiceless exercising their power. But maybe that's what we needed to do all along. And so I'm very proud of those individuals that are out there protesting. I joined them. I don't always have to speak at the protest. Sometimes I just show up because I'm listening. I'm hearing. I want to feel that energy. It makes me motivated to do the job that I do every day. So protest it is, and that's what it should always be, a protest.
About the treatment of African American women now, the veil's been pulled off of that, and oftentimes because down low, if you will, we've known about sexual assault. Now we're seeing, at the very least, some form of homicide that's going on. You go into Chandra Bland's house, you go into the young lady in Louisville's house. That's, murder or homicide, or what have you. But
Yeah.
it was dwarfed by what was happening to black men. Can you talk about it from a black woman's perspective now that veil's been coming off, and where you don't have the chokehold, you do have black women getting shot?
Yeah, I mean, you have. So I think in that case there was a no-knock warrant that the police had, and they were attempting to execute a warrant against someone who they actually, my understanding, already had in custody. So their wires got crossed. They were at the wrong house. This young woman who was a true public servant, I believe she was a EMS worker, so she had been assisting people on the front lines, and she was just enjoying her own evening in her own home, and to be killed for absolutely no reason but the negligence of the police department is just absolutely just unacceptable. In the case of Sandra Bland, she was my sorority sister. I'm a member of Sigma Gamma sorority. Sandra Bland was my sorority sister. Sandra Bland should have never been in jail, but you know what she was doing that day? She was protesting on the street her right to be treated like a resident, like a citizen, like a human being on a normal traffic stop. Tell me why I'm being stopped. I get, who are you? Who are you to stop me if you can't tell me why I am being stopped? And she was just asserting her rights on that street, and that officer could not take it, and so he took her to jail. And then, we know how that ended. But when there is protest, there is sacrifice. So some people who are protesting right now are being locked up, right? Some are, out on the streets. Their job may be open, but they're deciding instead of going in that day, they're losing money that day because they're standing for something. It is so important that we do this. We got to do it. We got to encourage it because that's the only way we're going to get change. What they want us to do is turn it into a demonstration. What they'd like us to do is just have forums and talk about it. Don't be on the street. Don't inconvenience the police officers. Don't inconvenience those who don't care about what you have to say. Don't inconvenience the flow of traffic. Don't inconvenience the flow of commerce. Yet I got to be inconvenienced by having my loved one murdered. I have to be inconvenienced as a Black woman who cares about everyone. But I've got, as a state's attorney, Prince George's County, I've got Black male prosecutors in my office who are inconvenienced every time they leave the house because they have to think in the back of their heads, if they don't know me, if they don't know I'm a prosecutor, how would those officers treat me if I'm stopped? They have to think that every single day. Police officers, when they are out of uniform, they tell themselves, look, I'm out of uniform. I'm just another brother on the street. They tell their sons, be careful. They have the talk with their children as well. Think about this. These are people who stand shoulder to shoulder with some people who they know are racist, but they are in a department together and they are working together to protect and serve communities. But yet that same officer can tell you that if they go out the next day, that same officer they stood beside the day before may not even recognize them out of uniform and will treat them like they would treat anyone else. And that is the problem. The officers want to say, well, it's 99% of us are really good officers. It's only a handful that are messing up and they're making it bad for everyone. But guess what? It's true for the people in the community. 99% of the people in the community are doing the right thing. It's only a handful of people that are causing the problems. But guess what? When you approach me, you don't assume I'm one of the 99%. You assume I'm part of the 1%. That's the problem.
So after the demonstrations, where do we go now? What kind
after
of
the protest? I thought we'd clear that
up. We just got a difference in narrative. I get where you're coming from. I'm just, trying to play. I know exactly what you mean. You demonstrate, in the midst of your protest. So we good. We are totally good. But after the protest, Madam State's Attorney, where do we go from here? What kind of?
It's not about a matter of after the protest, because the protest has to continue. It's got to continue into our state houses.
So it has to be a simultaneous thing?
Say it again.
Does this have to be simultaneous in your opinion? Did it have to be going on at the same time? Civil disobedience and litigation and legislation?
You know, why not? Because what happens is once people get comfortable, once politicians think, oh, that's died down, then it's business as usual. No, you got to keep up the fight. You got to keep letting them know what the expectations are. So I say, yes, take the protest to Annapolis, if you're in Maryland, or wherever your state capital is. Take it to your local counties, because they decide how money is going to be spent in their local jurisdictions. And if you think we need to spend more money on social services, which, oh, by the way, I do as state's attorney, I can tell you, we see plenty of social ills coming through the courthouse. And so that is an area that I personally would advocate for increasing funding for. But that is why the protest can't stop. But you can protest and still advocate at the same time.
That's Aisha Braveboy. And you know, the best campaign slogan of them all, a little bit like 2 years ago, was Brave Justice. And our conversation certainly personifies that. Reach out if you want to. I know I'll reach out again if I want to and I have to. So thank you so much for being there and being transparent and representing, because they're going to be litigators like you. Who knows? You might be that next Thurgood Marshall. How about that?
Well, HU is in the house.
Well, I got to give credit where credit is due. I went to Morgan, but, you know, I love my HBCU. There it is. All right. Thanks a lot. Aisha Braveboy, State's Attorney from Prince George's County, Maryland. That's going to close the book on this edition of The Gray Area. Thank you for hanging out with us. Remember, you can find me, Mark with a K, Gray with an A, at The Sports Groove. That's 24/7, 365 on your computer, smartphone, tablet, however you get your social media groove on. And by all means, give somebody you love a hug tonight. You may not get a chance to do it tomorrow. Till next time, peace.